The sound was the first thing the ground crew noticed. Not the absence of radio communication, not the unusual approach angle logged by the tower at 11:04 in the evening, but the sound, or more precisely, the quality of the silence that followed the sound. The engines of Meridian Air Flight 2281 cut from full approach power to idle to nothing in a sequence so smooth and deliberate that the two controllers on duty that night initially assumed it was a textbook manual landing. The Boeing 737 touched runway 14L at Harlan County Regional Airport in Corbin, Kentucky at 11:06 p.m. on the night of September 8, 2004, with a precision that the tower's landing data recorder would later describe as statistically near perfect. Centerline deviation of less than 2 feet, sync rate exactly within the recommended parameters. The plane rolled down the runway, turned left onto taxiway Charlie, and came to a full stop exactly at the yellow hold line where arriving aircraft are expected to pause before crossing to the terminal apron. And then it just sat there, engines winding down, running lights blinking in their normal sequence. The jet bridge arm already extending automatically from Gate 3, triggered by the aircraft transponder, moving toward a door that no one was going to open from the inside. The ground crew radioed the cockpit 3 times before anyone thought to physically approach the aircraft. The first response was static with a faint rhythmic interference beneath it, a low cycling pulse that one of the controllers later described as almost musical, though she immediately qualified that word and said she was not sure why she had chosen it. The second radio call produced nothing. The third produced a single word, spoken in a male voice at a register and cadence that the controller on duty that night, Earl Duckett, a 19-year aviation communications veteran, later said did not sound like anyone speaking into a microphone. It sounded like someone speaking in a room and being heard through a wall. The word was submitted to audio analysis at the FAA Technical Center in Atlantic City. The spectrographic report, designated Case File AUD 2004-0912-KY, concluded that the recording was acoustically anomalous in ways inconsistent with standard cockpit microphone capture. The specific frequency patterns did not match any known human vocal production model in the reference library. Different listeners reported hearing different things. Earl Duckett said it sounded like the word staying. A second controller said it sounded like waiting. The audio analyst who produced the report wrote in a handwritten marginal note, not part of the official document, that she personally heard the word already. She requested a transfer to a different department 6 weeks after completing the analysis. When the first ground crew member, a baggage handler named Thomas Greer, 24 years old, reached the forward door and knocked twice on the fuselage panel, he heard nothing. He tried the external interphone. It rang 6 times inside the aircraft. No one answered. Thomas later told investigators that at this point he felt something he struggled to name accurately. Not fear in the usual sense, more like the feeling you get when you walk into a room where something was just happening and whatever was happening has stopped specifically because you walked in, and the room is now arranged in a way that looks completely normal but is wrong in some way you cannot identify. He said the plane felt like that room when Karen Holst, his supervisor, manually activated the door from the outside access panel. The cabin lights were on at their standard illuminated setting. The air that came out was warm and carried the specific combination of recycled air and synthetic upholstery that anyone who has flown commercially would recognize without being able to name. And the cabin was completely empty. Meridian Air Flight 2281 had departed Cincinnati at 8:47 p.m. with 127 passengers and a crew of 6. The manifests were complete. The boarding confirmation was logged. 133 human beings had entered that aircraft, had buckled their belts, had been shown where the exits were located. The aircraft landed on time. The aircraft landed correctly. The aircraft contained when Thomas Greer and Karen Holst stepped inside at 11:09 p.m. not a single living person, not in the seats, not in the galleys, not in the lavatories, all four of which were unlocked and unoccupied, not in the cockpit, whose door was open, whose instruments were still live and cycling through their post-landing sequences, and on whose central console sat a paper coffee cup from the Cincinnati Airport departure lounge with approximately 2 inches of coffee still in it. The coffee was warm. If you have been sitting with this story and feeling a weight in your chest you cannot entirely account for, you are not alone in that. This channel exists for exactly that feeling, for the cases that the official record has not been able to close and that deserve to be taken seriously. Subscribe if you are not already here, because every week we return to stories like this one with the attention they deserve. You belong in this conversation. Before we go further, I want to ask you something directly. If you have ever walked into a space and felt, not intellectually but physically, that something about it was wrong in a way you could not explain, drop a comment right now. You can simply write, "I felt it too." Because the number of people watching this video who understand exactly what Thomas Greer described at that aircraft door is larger than you think. Your comment matters. It tells the next person who finds this video at 2 in the morning that they are not asking alone. The investigation into the disappearance of the passengers and crew of Meridian Air Flight 2281 was the largest aviation mystery inquiry conducted on American soil since the TWA Flight 800 investigation of 1996, and it differed from that inquiry in one fundamental way. In the case of TWA 800, investigators knew what had happened to the people on board. In the case of Meridian 2281, the aircraft was intact. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder were both functioning and were recovered within 40 minutes of the aircraft being secured. The flight data recorder showed a completely normal flight from departure to landing, with no anomalies in any monitored parameter until the final 4 minutes and 17 seconds before touchdown, during which 6 monitored systems showed readings that the lead investigator, Robert Ashby Crane, described in his preliminary field notes as physically inconsistent with any known flight condition. The elaboration on those findings appeared only in the classified addendum to the investigation's final report, and that addendum has not been released in any form. The cockpit voice recorder captured the standard loop of the last 2 hours of audio from the cockpit. The first 91 minutes were unremarkable. Captain David Merritt Callahan, age 52, and First Officer Grace Ann Voorhees, age 34, can be heard conducting standard pre-flight and departure procedures with the efficiency of an experienced crew. Their conversation during the flight was casual and competent, the communication of two people who trust each other's capability and do not need to perform that trust. They discussed the weather over the Appalachian Ridge. They discussed the approach procedure into Corbin. At 1 hour, 14 minutes and 33 seconds into the recording, Captain Callahan remarked that the coffee from the gate was surprisingly good for an airport that size, and First Officer Voorhees laughed and said she had been thinking the same thing. At 1 hour, 14 minutes and 51 seconds, the recording changed. The change was not a sound. It was an absence of sound in a configuration that the audio analysts found technically inexplicable. The ambient noise profile of the cockpit, the engines, the ventilation, the subtle vibration of the airframe, all of it stopped for 3 seconds and 200 milliseconds. Not the recording itself. The recording continued. The timestamp continued incrementing. But the sound within the recording was replaced by a silence that the technical report describes as acoustically sterile, containing none of the residual ambient frequencies that exist in any real environment on Earth, including soundproofed studios, including anechoic chambers. The analysts noted that the closest reference in their database was the audio signature of a recording made in deep space by the Voyager program. They included that reference as a technical comparison and explicitly not as an interpretive suggestion, because there was no data that could explain why the cockpit of a commercial aircraft on approach to a regional airport in Kentucky would briefly produce an audio environment acoustically identical to the vacuum of space. After those 3 seconds and 200 milliseconds, the sound returned. But neither Captain Callahan nor First Officer Voorhees spoke for 6 minutes and 44 seconds. The aircraft continued its approach correctly during this period. The controls were being managed with precision. The descent profile was being maintained. But neither pilot spoke. At the end of those 6 minutes and 44 seconds, a voice identified as belonging to Captain Callahan said, very quietly and without any legible emotional inflection, that the altitude was looking good. First Officer Voorhees responded that the visibility was clear, and then neither of them said anything else for the remaining 4 minutes and 9 seconds of the flight, during which the aircraft was guided to a perfect landing by hands that the cockpit data showed were on the controls, and that the physical evidence at the scene showed were not there. The passenger cabin recorder, installed on Meridian's 737 fleet beginning in 2002, captured the same acoustic anomaly at the same timestamp as the CVR, confirming that whatever produced that sterile silence had done so throughout the entire aircraft simultaneously. After the anomaly, the cabin audio returned to its ambient profile after approximately 40 seconds. What followed for the next 6 minutes was the sound of 127 passengers sitting in a pressurized aircraft cabin without speaking, without moving, without the incidental sounds that any recording made in any space occupied by that many people will inevitably contain. No coughing, no shifting in seats, no pages turning, no keyboards clicking, no the quiet particular sound of a person adjusting their earbuds. 127 people, and the acoustic profile of the cabin was indistinguishable from the profile it would have shown if no one was there, which, when the aircraft landed, was in fact the case. The NTSB investigation was formally opened on the morning of September 9, 2004. Robert Ashby Crane arrived at 6:20 a.m. with a team of 7 investigators covering the standard divisions of inquiry. The Human Factors Unit had the unusual assignment of determining how 133 people had, to use the precise language of the investigation's opening document, vacated a sealed pressurized aircraft during cruise flight without any recorded evidence of emergency procedure, structural breach, explosive decompression, or any other physical mechanism consistent with mass egress from a commercial aircraft in flight. The investigation's opening document uses the word vacated 4 times in its first 2 pages, each time in a grammatical construction that makes the word carry more weight than it should, as if the investigators who wrote it were not entirely comfortable with the word they had chosen and were trying to use clinical language to contain something clinical language was not built to hold. Within 48 hours, 3 hypotheses were formally advanced and subjected to evidential testing. The first was rapid decompression followed by catastrophic structural failure of a kind that would have expelled the passengers through a breach that subsequently resealed. This is physically impossible by any known mechanism, and every data point from the airframe inspection was inconsistent with it. It was formally closed on the evening of September 10th. The second was a coordinated criminal act involving an unknown chemical or biological agent, followed by removal of all passengers by external actors during an unrecorded window. The forensic sweep found no unknown agents. It found the expected trace DNA of the passengers and crew throughout the cabin, evidence that those people had been in those seats and breathed that air. It found no evidence of how they had left. The third hypothesis is the one the final public report refers to as cause undetermined, a designation that in aviation investigation is almost never used. and which had never before been applied to the reason that living human beings ceased to be physically present in an enclosed space from which there was no observable exit. The NTSB's final report was issued in redacted form in March 2006. The full unredacted version, requested under FOIA by aviation journalist Patricia Drummond-Hale in January 2007, was denied in its entirety. She appealed twice. Both appeals were denied. In her 2009 book on anomalous aviation incidents, she writes that she was told informally by a source with direct knowledge of the investigation's classified findings that the reason for classification was not geopolitical danger. It was that the findings were impossible in a more fundamental sense, the kind of impossible that does not fit inside any existing legal, scientific, or governmental framework, and that releasing them would require those frameworks to be rebuilt from scratch before the public could be given any context for understanding what they were reading. Two pieces of physical evidence from the investigation appear in the public record and have received insufficient attention. The first is the coffee cup. The cup found on the cockpit console was collected and logged as evidence on September 9th. The evidence log notes the contents as approximately 60 milliliters of medium roast coffee at a temperature of 84 degrees Fahrenheit at the time of collection, roughly 2 hours after the aircraft landed. The standard cooling rate for that volume of liquid in the recorded cabin temperature would produce a temperature of 86 to 92 degrees at 2 hours. A reading of 84 degrees was within the expected range, but at its lower edge. What was not within the expected range was the surface of the coffee itself. The analyst who logged the evidence noted that the liquid showed no film formation and no oxidation ring at the cup wall, both of which appear on any hot liquid that has been sitting open in air for a significant period. This was flagged for further review. The follow-up analysis, if it was conducted, does not appear in the public investigation record. The cup was sealed and transferred to the FAA Technical Center. Its current location in the evidence archive is listed as indefinite storage, a classification that does not appear in the standard FAA Evidence Protocol Manual because the protocol manual does not contain that classification at all. The second piece of evidence is the seat configuration of row 22. All 3 seats in that row were occupied on the manifest. Seat 22D by Harold Burton Westin, age 44, a structural engineer. Seat 22E by Carla Denise Marchetti, age 31, a dental hygienist. And seat 22F by Owen Thomas Marchetti, age 7, Carla's son, traveling as a lap child. When the cabin walkthrough was conducted at 11:12 p.m., seat 22F was reclined to its full position and locked there, meaning it had been held in recline long enough for the auto-lock mechanism to engage, which requires sustained pressure of at least 45 seconds. A small blue backpack with a cartoon character on it was in the seat pocket of the row in front, exactly where a parent in 22E would stow a child's bag. The backpack contained a stuffed animal, a pair of children's sunglasses, and a coloring book open to a page partially filled in with crayons. The page was a drawing of an airplane. The child had been coloring it blue. Beside the coloring book, tucked into the spine, were 4 crayons in the colors that were in use when the coloring stopped. Robert Ashby Crane retired from the NTSB in 2009, 1 year before his mandatory retirement age. He told a colleague in a conversation later recounted in a now-deleted personal blog post that was archived by a web preservation service that the Meridian case was the reason he left. Not because of the impossibility of what had happened, but because of the specificity of it. He said that you can train yourself to hold impossible things at a clinical distance, to process them as anomalies rather than as events that happened to people. But the difficulty with Meridian 2281 was that the evidence kept pushing back against that distance. Every time you tried to look at it as an abstract problem, something in the physical record reminded you that it was a specific airplane, with specific people in specific seats, with specific coffee cups and specific backpacks and specific unfinished pages of coloring books, and that those specific people had been going somewhere, had had plans for the day after, had had phone calls to make when they landed. He said that what he could never fully set down was the thought of the child in seat 22F, who had been coloring an airplane at some point during the flight and had at some point put down the crayons, and whether the putting down of the crayons happened before whatever happened or during it or after it, and whether the child had any time to understand, in the way that a 7-year-old can understand something that adults cannot name, what was happening to the world around him. If this story has settled into you in a way you are not sure how to carry, that is the correct response to what you have heard. Leave a like if this reached you in that particular place. It tells the algorithm that stories like this one deserve to reach more people. Subscribe and come back next week, because we are covering a town in Oregon that was incorporated, taxed, mapped, and populated for 11 years, and that the state government quietly removed from every official record in 1971, with no explanation ever made public, and no acknowledgement that the 340 people who lived there were ever real. There are 133 names on the manifest of Meridian Air Flight 2281. Ellen Corinne Morse, who called her mother from the departure gate at 8:31 p.m. and whose last words were that she would call when she landed. Harold Burton Westin, Carla Denise Marchetti, Owen Thomas Marchetti, age 7, who was coloring an airplane blue somewhere over Tennessee, and who put the crayons down at some point during the last 41 minutes of a flight that landed perfectly, and who has not been anywhere since. The aircraft still exists, presumably stored somewhere in the California desert, among thousands of others that have finished their useful lives, distinguished from them by nothing visible from the outside, and distinguishable only by what it once carried and no longer does. Workers at the facility, according to a researcher who has been tracking the aircraft for years, refer to the section where it is parked as the quiet section. Not an official designation. Just a shared understanding among people who have worked near it that going close to that particular aircraft produces a feeling that experienced mechanics do not have words for and do not try to explain, only avoid. The space where 133 people used to be, still shaped perhaps by their having been there, still holding, the way a surface holds the impression of weight after the weight has gone, the outline of something that was present and is now somewhere the outline cannot follow.